Here's part 2 for the Chapter 8 Mindtap questions. Let's get going. Question 1. Engagement activity. Effectiveness of baby language videos. The excerpts. Can videos help babies acquire language? Educational videos are a multi-billion-rand industry. As parents seek to prepare their children for school, the target audience for these videos has been for children as young as infants. There is a wealth of anecdotal evidence suggesting that these videos can accelerate the process of language acquisition, but empirical studies are few and far between. Judy DeLoach and colleagues used an experiment to systematically test whether these videos are effective. Read this excerpt from the article and answer the following questions. Evaluating baby language videos introduction. But how well do infants actually learn from visual media? Because development typically proceeds at a very rapid pace in the first years of life, parents may misattribute ordinary developmental progress to their children's media exposure. For example, on one commercial website, a parent reported that her 18-month-old child had very few words until she started watching one of the company's videos, at which point her vocabulary suddenly blossomed. Methods participants were 72 infants between 12 and 18 months of age, M equals 14.7 months. 18 children, including approximately equal numbers of girls and boys, were randomly assigned to each of 4 conditions. In the video with interaction condition, the child and a parent watched the DVD together at least 5 times a week over a 4-week period, for a total of 10 or more hours of viewing time in 20 or more viewing episodes. In the video with no interaction condition, the children watched the video alone but had the same total amount of exposure to it as did the children in the video with interaction condition. In the parent teaching condition, the children were not exposed to the video at all. Instead, the parents were given a list of the 25 words featured on the video and were instructed simply to try to teach your child as many of these words as you can in whatever way seems natural to you. The fourth condition, in which there was no intervention, was a control condition. Results and discussion. Only the performance of the parent teaching group was above chance. P.O.5. The result of primary importance is clear. Children who had extensive exposure to a popular infant video over a full month, either with a parent or alone, did not learn any more new words than did children with no exposure to the video at all. Words recognized by different experimental groups. Condition percent correct parent teaching 49% video with interaction 38% video without interaction 33% control 34%. Post hoc tests indicated that the performance of the parent teaching group was significantly better than that of all 3 of the other groups. Neither of the video conditions differed from the control condition. Thus, significantly more learning occurred in the context of everyday parent-child interactions than in front of television screens. Question 1. Answer time. Which of the following statements accurately describes the results of this experiment? The videos had no effect on the course of children's language development. Children who watched the videos were significantly worse off than the control group, which had no systematic exposure to word learning. Videos watched with parental involvement produced the best performance on the vocabulary post-test. It's A. The videos had no effect on the course of children's language development. The explanation says the only children to benefit from systematic language instruction were those in the parent-teacher group. Both video groups were statistically equivalent to a control group. It appears as though any gains in language acquisition observed for the video groups would have occurred anyway. The videos didn't help, but they also didn't seem to negatively impact language development. Question 1b. Many of the companies that produce these types of videos include a disclaimer stating that parents should be watching with children for maximum effectiveness. Why then would DeLoach and colleagues include a video without interaction condition? A. Correct II mimics real-world situations where parents put on a video to keep their child occupied while they work on another task. B. The researchers assumed that most children ignore their parents and focus on the videos anyway. C. To do a good statistical test, the researchers needed an even number of groups or conditions. The answer is A. It mimics real-world situations where parents put on a video to keep their child occupied while they work on another task. The explanation is the video conditions in this study were designed to mirror real-world usage of these videos. Some parents will diligently watch along with their children. Others will use the video as an electronic babysitter. Their children are placated by what's appearing on screen, while the parents can attend to other matters, like cleaning the house, preparing meals, or catching up on other work. This experimental design allowed researchers to determine whether the videos provided any benefit when used in such a way. Question 2. The structure of language. Question 2a. All languages have a hierarchical organization, a particular structure that governs how various language components are combined. Within this hierarchy, sentences are immediately formed from A. Morphemes, B. Words, C. Phrases. The correct answer is C. Phrases. Explanation. The lowest level of the language hierarchy is phonemes, the individual units of sounds that are used in a particular language. These phonemes are combined to form morphemes, which are units of meaning. These morphemes are then combined to form words. Words are combined to form phrases, and phrases are combined to form sentences. Question 2b. The lowest levels of the hierarchy are phonemes and morphemes. These are the individual components that make up words. Use the drop-down menus to indicate how many phonemes and morphemes the following two words have. Risen has 5 phonemes that correspond to the individual sounds within the word. Risen. It also has 2 morphemes, the root rise and the suffix -en, which indicates that the verb is a past participle. Smellier has 6 phonemes that correspond to the individual sounds within the word. Smelir. It also has 3 morphemes, the root smell, the suffix y, spelled here as I, indicating that this is an adjective, and the suffix -er, indicating a greater quantity. Question 1c. Noam Chomsky, a distinguished linguist, theorized that sentences were created by applying transformation rules to a limited set of core concepts. How would he have described transformation rules? A. They control how bilinguals are able to think in 2 languages simultaneously. B. They allow a common idea to be expressed in several different ways. C. They are used to divide large concepts, like dogs, into smaller concepts, like poodles. The answer is B. They allow a common idea to be expressed in several different ways. Explanation. Transformation rules determine the different ways that an idea can be expressed using language. The boy hit the ball with a bat can be expressed passively. The ball was hit by the boy with a bat, in a different tense. The boy with the bat is hitting a ball, or with a different phrasing. The boy with a bat hit the ball. Question 3. Milestones in language development. Question 3a. In humans, language develops rapidly over the first 24 months of life. Individual differences exist in the timing and rate of development, but the general pattern is largely consistent. Most children will progress through the same set of stages, as represented in the figure below. Complete the figure by using the drop-down menus to select the appropriate stage and the age range that corresponds to each stage. Random vocalizations happen at 3 months. Babbling happens at 6 months. First words happen at 1 year. Telegraphic phrases happen at 2 years. Adult-like speech competence happens at 4 years. Here is the full table. Reflexive communication happens between 1 to 5 months. Babbling happens between 6 to 18 months. First words happen between 10 to 13 months. One-word sentences happen between 12-18 months. Vocabulary spurt happens between 18 to 24 months. Telegraphic speech happens around 2 years. 3-word sentences happen around 2.5 years. Well-developed syntax happens around 5 years. Metalinguistic awareness happens around 6 years. Notice that the stages sometimes overlap with each other. For instance, children continue babbling long after they start using words. Random vocalizations happen at 3 months. Babbling happens at 6 months. First words happen at 1 year. Telegraphic phrases happen at 2 years. Adult-like speech competence happens at 4 years. Here is the full table. Reflexive communication happens between 1 to 5 months. Babbling happens between 6 to 18 months. First words happen between 10 to 13 months. One-word sentences happen between 12-18 months. Vocabulary spurt happens between 18 to 24 months. Telegraphic speech happens around 2 years. 3-word sentences happen around 2.5 years. Well-developed syntax happens around 5 years. Metalinguistic awareness happens around 6 years. Notice that the stages sometimes overlap with each other. For instance, children continue babbling long after they start using words. Question 3b. Children acquire language at different rates. Some are verbal before they turn 1, while others have limited abilities until they're nearly 2. Regardless of the rate at which language develops, Children progress through the stages in a relatively consistent manner. One pattern often seen is that certain types of words are easier for children to learn. Which of the following graphs best illustrates the typical pattern of noun and verb acquisition? It's graph 1. Explanation. Researchers who investigate language acquisition have found 3 general patterns that describe how children's abilities develop. 1. Comprehension develops earlier than production. Young children can understand much more than they can say. 2. Nouns develop earlier than verbs. Young children can refer to objects more easily than they can refer to actions. 3. Children undergo a vocabulary spurt, which often lasts for several years. The first 10 to 15 words are generally acquired slowly over the first 18 months, but children may learn as many as 20 words per week during the spurt. The correct graph shows that the child has many more nouns than verbs in his or her vocabulary. The incorrect graph shows the opposite pattern. Question 3c. As children gain experience with language, they often engage in overregularization. What is an overregularization? A. An inability to recognize that there are exceptions to different linguistic rules. B. An attempt to mimic the type of speech they hear from adults and older children. C. A mistake that occurs when a child uses a single word to refer to a wide range of concepts. Question 3c. A. An inability to recognize that there are exceptions to different linguistic rules. Explanation. Overregularizations occur when children try to apply a grammatical rule too broadly, failing to realize that some rules have exceptions. For instance, they might say mans instead of men or braked instead of broke. Eventually, children move past this stage as they learn and remember the specific words that are exceptions to the rules. Question 4. Bilingualism. Read the following scenario on bilingualism in education and answer the question that follows. A university is considering whether to eliminate its bilingual program and move to an all-English curriculum. Before voting, the university administrators puts together a committee to study the issue and appoints you as its social science expert. Your task is to summarize the available research on the positive and negative effects of bilingual programs and make a recommendation on how the board should vote. Which summary is consistent with the information presented in your text? A. Compared to monolingual children, bilingual children have an early disadvantage in language acquisition that never gets made up. B. The course and rate of language development for bilingual children is equivalent to that of monolingual children. C. Bilingual children show increased vocabularies in both of their languages compared to monolingual children. Clearly the answer would be B, but you know which individuals have actually higher cognitive flexibility, analytical reasoning, and selective attention? The people who download this week's sponsor. RAID, Shadow Legends, trademark sign, is an immersive online experience with everything you'd expect from a brand new RPG title. It's got an amazing storyline, awesome 3D graphics, giant boss fights, PvP battles, and hundreds of never-before-seen champions to collect and customize. I never expected to get this level of performance out of a mobile game. Look how crazy the level of detail is on these champions. RAID, Shadow Legends, trademark sign, is getting big real fast, so you should definitely get in early. Starting now will give you a huge head start. There's also an upcoming special launch tournament with crazy prizes. And not to mention, this game is absolutely free, so go ahead and check out the video description to find out more about RAID, Shadow Legends, trademark sign. There, you will find a link to the store page and a special code to unlock all sorts of goodies. Using the special code Psych102, you can get 50,000 silver immediately, and a free epic level champion as part of the new players program, courtesy of course of the RAID, Shadow Legends, trademark sign, devs. Now back to the question. It's B, the course and rate of language development for bilingual children is equivalent to that of monolingual children. Explanation. Although a few studies have conflicting results, much of the available research suggests that learning two languages has no lasting negative effects. Bilingual children may show vocabulary deficits in each of their languages individually, but their total vocabulary is generally equivalent to that of monolingual children. Additionally, the course and rate at which bilingual children develop language skills is largely similar to that of monolingual children and follows the same general pattern. However, the speed and ease with which a bilingual child thinks of a word may be hindered by the fact that both their first and second language are simultaneously active during these processes, creating cross language interference that may slow language processing. Nevertheless, researchers are quick to point out that contemporary research highlights that, all else being equal, bilingual children have greater cognitive flexibility than monolingual children and can direct their attention more efficiently. Question 5a. Theories of language acquisition. Researchers have proposed several theories of language acquisition with disagreements among theorists mirroring the nature versus nurture debate. The first theory to gain traction within the field of psychology was B.F. Skinner's behaviorist theory. Which of the following principles is part of this theory? A. Children are highly imaginative and will often develop new and novel ways of speaking. B. Children rarely pay attention to how adults respond to their attempts at speaking. C. If the child is reinforced for a word or sentence, he or she will repeat it. It's C. If the child is reinforced for a word or sentence, he or she will repeat it. Explanation. Behaviorist theories can be summarized as relying on three principles. 1. Observation and imitation are critical. Young children attempt to mimic the language usage of adults and older children too. Adults provide reinforcement or punishment for the child's attempts to use language. When children are reinforced for saying something, they will incorporate it into their vocabulary. 3. As the child ages, adults require the child to use words correctly before providing reinforcement. When the child is young, parents may provide food when the child says, "My hoji." After some time, parents may withhold reinforcement until the child correctly produces, "I'm hungry." Question 5b. Nativist theories were originally developed as a response to Skinner's theory. Noam Chomsky developed his theory as a way of accounting for the limitations of the behaviorist approach. Although some research findings are consistent with nativist theories, these theories have been criticized for several shortcomings. Which of the following is a valid criticism? A. The theories lack specificity, making it difficult to empirically test them. B. Behaviorist theories more accurately predict the pattern of language acquisition observed in children. C. The theories claim that language acquisition occurs rapidly for children, but most adults learn a second language faster than children learn their first. It's A. The theories lack specificity, making it difficult to empirically test them. Explanation. One of the major criticisms of nativist theories is that they are vague and non-specific. Nativist theorists have never provided a detailed description of the language acquisition device, LAD. Acquisition is thought to result from biological maturation of the brain, but the mechanisms and processes by which this happens aren't described. This makes it difficult to derive concrete predictions that can be scientifically tested. This has led some critics to claim that nativist theories are more descriptive than explanatory. Question 6. Approaches and barriers to problem solving. Problem solving is defined as a mental activity focused on finding a way to achieve a particular goal. Often, the solution you need isn't obvious. If it were, you wouldn't have much of a problem. Several different types of problems exist. Those related to transformation typically involve changing the way the elements of a problem are arranged. A large degree of information that must be ignored. Carrying out a sequence of actions to reach a stated goal. A goal that is often not specified. It's C. Carrying out a sequence of actions to reach a stated goal. Explanation. Problems related to transformation typically involve figuring out what sequence of steps will lead from state A to state B. For example, turn a 9 into a 7 using addition, multiplication, and division, along with the numbers 1, 2, and 3. You know the start and the end, but you need to work out what the middle should be. Changing the way the elements of a problem are arranged is the goal of problems of arrangement. However, neither ignoring a large degree of information nor reaching a goal that is not specified are typically involved in problems of inducing structure, arrangement, or transformation. Question 6b. Solving a problem, even a simple one, results from a 4-step process. This sequence is designed to capture the thought processes that people go through when facing a problem. By envisioning problem solving in this way, psychologists can try to identify the things that contribute to success and the pitfalls that led to a lack of success. Complete this table by selecting the correct description of each step. Step 1. Understand the 2. Devise a 3. Carry out the plan 4. Look back. The answers are: Step 1. Understand the problem. Form a mental representation of the problem. 2. Devise a plan. Develop a plan for resolving the problem. 3. Carry out the plan. Put your solution into action. 4. Look back. Evaluate how well your plan is working. Explanation 1. Understand the problem. To solve a problem, you must identify the factors that contribute to the problem. This involves forming a representation of the problem that specifies how the current state of affairs differs from your goal. The end result of this is a problem that is framed in a way that allows you to figure out what needs to be addressed in your solution. Sometimes this involves representing a large problem as a series of smaller ones. Other times, an inventory of potential biases or relevant information is taken to devise a plan. Generate potential solutions based on the way you've framed the problem. The more alternative approaches you come up with, the better your chances of success are. Once these alternatives have been generated, you must decide on which one you will take. 3. Carry out the plan. Implement the plan you chose, try it out, and put it into action. 4. Look back. Evaluate whether your plan has been successful. This often involves making assessments of how well you've achieved your objectives. Determine whether the problem still exists or if your efforts have solved them. Question 6c. Sometimes solving a problem is difficult due to the limitations of people's thinking abilities. Several common obstacles get in nearly everyone's way. Why are unnecessary constraints a potential obstacle to problem solving? A. They are often the result of someone actively trying to interfere with your ability to solve a problem. B. They led you to focus mainly on what has worked in the past, regardless of whether it can be applied to the current problem. C. The goal of the problem might not be clear when these constraints are added to a problem. D. The assumptions made regarding a problem can lead to the preemptive elimination of viable approaches to problem solving. It's D. The assumptions made regarding a problem can lead to the preemptive elimination of viable approaches to problem solving. Explanation. Unnecessary constraints occur when the problem solver, not the problem statement, imposes constraints on the method for solving a problem. For example, thinking that the presence of 9 dots on a page constrain an answer to be within the 9 dots. Unfortunately, this can lead to the preemptive elimination of viable approaches to problem solving. To counteract this limitation, a person should approach a problem assuming that no constraints exist unless specified otherwise by the problem statement. Question 60. When presented with a problem, you can employ several strategies to solve it. Part of what makes a problem difficult is the need to choose an appropriate strategy. Which of the following describe the strategy of forming sub-goals? Check all that apply. A. Taking principles from a solved problem and applying them in a new context. B. A difficult strategy because people tend to focus on the superficial aspects of a problem. C. Making the problem easier by dividing it into smaller steps. It's C. Making the problem easier by dividing it into smaller steps. Explanation. Sub-goals are the intermediate steps of a solution. These are often more manageable or easily attainable than solving the problem as a whole. They can also provide structure and form to the representation of a problem. Sub-goals do not involve taking principles from a solved problem and applying them in a new context. Nor is it a difficult strategy that causes people to focus on the superficial aspects of a problem. Question 7. Engagement activity. Irrationality and decision making. Can analyzing a decision lead to suboptimal choices? In an ingenious study, Wilson and Schooler asked university students to rate the quality of 5 different kinds of strawberry jam. When asked to simply taste the jams, students' ratings correlated significantly with those made by expert tasters. When asked to come up with reasons why certain jams were better, students' ratings were quite different than the experts' ratings. This suggests that analyzing a decision doesn't always lead to a better decision. Read this excerpt from Wilson and Schooler's article and answer the questions that follow. Question 7. Excerpts. Thinking too much. Introspection can reduce the quality of preferences and decisions. Introduction. When faced with a difficult decision, people sometimes spend a good deal of time thinking about the advantages and disadvantages of each alternative. At one point or another, most of us have even reached for a sheet of paper and made a list of pluses and minuses, hoping that the best course of action would become clear. Reflection of this kind is generally thought to be beneficial, organizing what might otherwise be a confusing jumble of thoughts and feelings. Curiously, however, there has been almost no research on the effects of reflection and deliberation on the quality of decision making. One reason for this lack of research is the difficulty of assessing how good any particular decision is. The purpose of the present studies was to examine the effects of 2 different kinds of introspection on decision making. We hypothesized that contrary to conventional wisdom, Introspection is not always beneficial and might even be detrimental under some circumstances. Methods: we purchased 5 brands of strawberry jams or preserves that varied in their overall quality, as reported by Consumer Reports magazine. Strawberry jams, 1985. The Consumer Reports rankings were based on the ratings of 7 consultants who were trained sensory panelists. These experts rated 16 sensory characteristics such as sweetness, bitterness, and aroma of 45 jams. These ratings were averaged to compute the ranking of each jam. The jams we purchased were ranked 1st, 11th, 24th, 32nd, and 44th. After receiving these initial instructions and signing a consent form, subjects were randomly assigned to a control or a reasons analysis condition. Reasons analysis subjects received written instructions asking them to analyze why you feel the way you do about each jam. In order to prepare yourself for your evaluations, they were told that they would be asked to list their reasons for liking or disliking the jams after they tasted them, the purpose of which was to organize their thoughts. They were also told that they would not be asked to hand in their list of reasons. Control subjects did not receive any additional instructions. All subjects were then asked to sit at a table with 5 plates, each containing a plastic spoon with approximately 1/2 teaspoon, 3.3 milliliters of strawberry jam. The jams were labeled with a letter from A to E and were presented in one random order. Experimenter 1 left the room, during which time the subjects tasted each of the 5 jams. All subjects tasted the jams without filling out any questionnaires and then were given a questionnaire to fill out when the experimenter returned. Subjects in the reasons condition received the reasons questionnaire. Subjects in the control condition received a filler questionnaire instructing them to list reasons why they chose their favorite. Experimenter 1 introduced subjects to Experimenter 2, who was unaware of whether they had analyzed reasons. Experimenter 2 gave subjects a questionnaire on which to evaluate the jams, which consisted of a 9-point scale ranging from disliked, 1, to liked, 9. For each jam, subjects were instructed to complete the questionnaire and to place it through a slot in a covered box. To maintain anonymity, Experimenter 2 left the room while subjects made their ratings. Results in discussion. Mean ratings for the 5 jams. For the control group, Jam 1, mean 6.52, SD 2.22. Jam 2, mean 7.64, SD 1.68. Jam 3, mean 6.12, SD 2.05. Jam 4, mean 2.72, SD 2.26. Jam 5, mean 4.68, SD 2.66. For the reasons group, Jam 1, mean 4.54, SD 2.00. Jam 2, mean 6.25, SD 2.38. Jam 3, mean 5.42, SD 2.70. Jam 4, mean 2.88, SD 2.13. Jam 5, mean 4.92, SD 2.89. Note, the jams are listed in order of their ranking by the Consumer Reports experts. Jam 1 was the highest ranked jam, Jam 2 was the second highest, and so on. Left to their own devices, control subjects formed preferences for strawberry jams that corresponded well to the ratings of trained sensory experts. Subjects asked to think about why they liked or disliked the jams brought to mind reasons that did not correspond very well with the experts' ratings. They then seem to have based their preferences on these reasons. In other words, the correlation between the attitude implied by their reasons and their subsequent preferences was extremely high. As a result, their preferences did not correspond as well with expert opinion. No evidence was found for the possibility that analyzing reasons moderated subjects' judgments. Instead, it changed people's minds about how they felt, presumably because certain aspects of the jams that were not central to their initial evaluations were weighted more heavily. For example, their chunkiness or tartness. It might be argued that there should have been a greater correspondence between the experts and subjects who analyzed reasons, because both sets of people made their ratings in an analytical frame of mind. The ratings made by the two groups, however, differed in important ways. First, the experts were provided in advance with a list of 16 criteria on which to evaluate the jams. In contrast, the subjects had to decide for themselves which criteria to use. increasing the probability that they would focus on a few attributes that were salient and plausible as causes of their preferences. Second, the experts were trained sensory panelists with a good deal of experience in tasting food items. Thus, even if the experts evaluated the jams analytically, we would expect their ratings to differ from the subjects in our reasons condition, who were not experts. Question 7a. What was the primary difference between the control and experimental groups in this experiment? A. The experimental group tasted a different set of jams than the control group. B. The experimental group saw the experts' ratings before tasting the jams, whereas the control group did not. C. The experimental group was asked to provide reasons for liking or disliking the jams they tasted, whereas the control group was not. D. The experimental group rated each jam on a 9-point scale, whereas the control group made a rank order of their preferences. It's C. The experimental group was asked to provide reasons for liking or disliking the jams they tasted, whereas the control group was not. Explanation. The jams, rating scale, and tasting procedure were the same for both groups. The only difference was that the experimental group was asked to provide reasons for liking or disliking the jams they tasted. Wilson and Schooler wanted to know if engaging in that type of analysis affected the ratings students gave to each of the jams. Question 7b. Which of the following statements accurately describes the ratings made by the participants in this experiment? A. The jam rated second best by the control group was rated fourth best by the experimental group. B. The ratings differed, but the overall ranking of the 5 jams was the same for the control and experimental groups. C. The experimental group gave every jam higher ratings than the control group. D. The jam rated best by the control group was rated worst by the experimental group. It's A. The jam rated second best by the control group was rated fourth best by the experimental group. Explanation. As shown in the table in the previous excerpts, both groups gave jam 2 the highest ratings, but the experimental group was considerably less enthusiastic. The control group rated jam 1 second best, but the experimental group rated it fourth best. Both groups agreed that jam 4 was the worst and assigned similar ratings to jam 5. The difference in ratings given to jams 1 and 2 suggested that trying to analyze why a jam was liked had a significant impact in some, but not all, cases. Question 7c. Wilson and Schooler state that analysis changed people's minds about how they felt in this experiment. Which of the following thought processes is consistent with this assertion? A. They developed an initial rating after tasting each jam and focused on attributes that could justify that rating. B. They focused on largely the same set of attributes that experts did but weren't experienced enough to translate their analysis into a numerical rating. C. They focused on attributes that were detectable but not necessarily relevant to liking, then altered their opinion so that it matched their analysis. D. They explicitly compared each jam against the others and assigned ratings based on a relative rather than an absolute scale. It's C. They focused on attributes that were detectable but not necessarily relevant to liking, then altered their opinion so that it matched their analysis. Explanation. In this experiment, participants in the experimental group are doing the analysis before they provide a rating. Wilson and Schooler propose that the act of analyzing the jams causes the participants to shift their ratings. The limited expertise of the participants leads them to focus on a limited number of qualities that can be detected. These qualities, however, might not be related to liking. It's quite possible that the analysis highlights negative-seeming attributes that otherwise wouldn't have been considered. For example, during the analysis, they might write down that a particular jam seemed chunky and then think, that doesn't seem like a good thing for jam, leading to a lower rating. If you just asked them how much they liked the jam, they might not focus on its texture. Question 8a. Decisions. Preferences. It's nearly impossible to keep track of and evaluate all the potential factors that can influence a decision. As a result, your ability to make decisions is heavily affected by biases, distortions, and cognitive limitations. When faced with competing options, you might try to figure out what factors are really important. One way of determining preference is to use an additive model. Which of the following properties are associated with the additive approach? Check all that apply. A. For this strategy to be effective, you must rate the attributes on some objective basis, rather than on subjective desires. B. The ratings you give to various attributes must be positive. C. You assign attributes within this model different weights depending on their importance. It's C. You assign attributes within this model different weights depending on their importance. Explanation. According to the additive approach, you will make choices based on the attributes that are most important to you. You can think of this strategy as a side-by-side comparison of different options. You determine which attributes are important and then rate each choice on how well it satisfies each attribute. You might rate more important attributes more heavily when making the final decision. The usefulness of this strategy is limited to choices involving few attributes, because it can quickly become difficult to keep track of them. Question 8b. Research has shown that when evaluating a product, people tend to rely on factors that aren't related to the item's objective quality. You can present people with two identical televisions, like those illustrated here, and find their judgments of quality impacted by some extraneous variable. If a majority of participants rated television 1 as being of better quality, you can assume that this television had the A. higher price tag, B. better picture quality. It's a higher price tag. Explanation. Extraneous variables are those that do not relate to the quality of an item, like color, price, or familiarity. Researchers have found that the price of an item can have a significant influence on how people perceive and evaluate it. If people think an item is expensive, they'll tend to perceive it more favorably than if they think it's cheap. Question 9. Decisions, risks and expected utility. You must often make decisions without knowing what the outcome will be. This uncertainty results in a range of decision-making approaches. Psychologists call decisions rational when they conform to objective mathematical analysis. One rational approach is to calculate the expected value of a decision using the following formula. Expected value equals probability of success x value of success plus probability of loss x value of loss. You will apply this formula to the following scenario. Vuao's friend offers him a bet that consists of rolling a die 10 times. If Vuao rolls a 2 on a normal 6-sided die, he gets R25. Each roll costs R5. What is the expected value of each roll? Based on the expected value, should Vuao take this bet? The expected value of each roll is -5/6. Based on the expected value, Vuao should not take this bet. Explanation. According to the expected value theory, decisions should be based on the expected payout or expected loss. Expected value here is equal to 1/5 times 25/5 plus 5/6x5, which simplifies down to 5/6. When the expected value is negative, you're likely to lose in the long run. When the expected value is positive, you're likely to come out ahead in the long run. In this case, Vuao should not take the bet. Question 9b. The expected value approach is designed to serve as a guide for decision making. What is one limitation of this approach's usefulness with regard to its purpose? A. You may not know how gains and losses should be valued. B. Expected values can be easily manipulated to produce the choice you want to make. C. It's only applicable for gambling situations, not real-world decisions. It's A. You may not know how gains and losses should be valued. Explanation. The expected value approach has several limitations. One is that many decisions are made under conditions of incomplete information. You don't always know how to value the gains and losses, or you might not know what probabilities should be assigned to the various outcomes. Additionally, this approach doesn't include aspects of a decision that are hard to quantify. If you drive, you pay car insurance. Assuming you're safe, the policy will never pay out. Should this be considered a loss? You pay money, but never collect any back. Many people would argue that the peace of mind associated with knowing you're protected in case of an accident has value. This value is a different amount for every person. It's a subjective value that plays a role in your decision, but that isn't easily captured by expected value calculations. Question 10a. Decisions, heuristics, loss aversion, and evolutionary analysis. Your ability to make decisions is heavily affected by biases, distortions, and cognitive limitations. Even though this may cause you to make irrational decisions, you often do so in predictable ways. Many decisions involve choices about preferences. These days, you have more options than ever before. You can find up to 30 different kinds of peanut butter in some supermarkets. What has Barry Schwartz proposed regarding this unprecedented degree of choice? A. You are less satisfied with your decisions when choosing from a larger number of options. B. You make fewer errors in reasoning when faced with a number of choices. C. You largely eliminate choices on the basis of objective data rather than subjective desires. Question 10b. Other decisions often involve the need to make choices under conditions of uncertainty. In these situations, people rely heavily on heuristics. The following scenarios involve the use of heuristics, which is an example of the availability heuristic. Scenario 1. Erna is learning about cancer in science class and is surveying her parents' friends to find out if they know that bladder cancer causes more deaths than skin cancer. Most people she surveys say they believe skin cancer leads to more deaths, and they then tell her stories of people they know who had it. Erna feels smart when she corrects those that guessed wrong and tells them that bladder cancer actually causes more deaths. Scenario 2. Peter is having lunch with a friend when they overhear the man next to them talking about a person he knows that just had his third heart attack. Peter and his friend both look at each other in shock and remember to comment about the situation once they leave the restaurant. Peter states that the person that had the heart attacks was probably over 55, and his friend states that the person was even more likely to be over 55 and a smoker. It's scenario 1. Erna is learning about cancer in science class and is surveying her parents' friends to find out if they know that bladder cancer causes more deaths than skin cancer. Most people she surveys say they believe skin cancer leads to more deaths, and they then tell her stories of people they know who had it. Erna feels smart when she corrects those that guessed wrong and tells them that bladder cancer actually causes more deaths. Explanation. Two primary heuristics influence the judgments that people make: the availability heuristic and the representativeness heuristic. Scenario 1 is an example of the availability heuristic. The availability heuristic leads people to estimate an event based on how easy it is to bring instances of that event to mind. For example, in the wake of a tragic event, especially if it involves widespread media coverage or cultural awareness, people are often more vigilant about the possibility of it occurring again. Coming to a decision about the lethal nature of certain types of cancer based on the number of friends you have that have had it or died from it is an example of this. The representativeness heuristic leads people to make judgments based on how much something represents a particular category. Examples of this are relying on stereotypes to categorize a person or assuming a coin will come up heads or tails based on the trends that have occurred previously. Both instances fail to see each choice as a new decision that should not logically be based on what came before. The details of scenario 2 are an example of the representativeness heuristic. Question 10c. The scenario that is an example of the availability heuristic also illustrates one of the common flaws in decision-related reasoning. Question 10c. The scenario that is an example of the availability heuristic also illustrates one of the common flaws in decision-related reasoning: overestimating the improbable. Explanation. The common flaw in decision-related reasoning illustrated by scenario 1 is overestimating the improbable. When information is more readily available in a person's memory, he or she tends to overestimate its importance or likelihood of happening again. So even though there are higher rates of fatality associated with bladder cancer, the more publicized nature of skin cancer can cause a person to incorrectly assume more deaths are associated with skin cancer than bladder cancer. Question 10d. People often make decisions on the basis of how information about the problem is represented. Algorithms provide the most accurate information, but creating and following them often consumes time and mental resources. As a result, people rely heavily on heuristics. Heuristics are more efficient, but they don't always lead to the correct answer. Which of the following properties are associated with the availability heuristic? Check all that apply. I. Refusing to consider information unless it comes from an approved source. B. The ability to recall specific instances of an event influences your estimate of how often that event occurs. C. Basing estimates of how prevalent something is on how easily examples of it come to mind. It's B. The ability to recall specific instances of an event influences your estimate of how often that event occurs. And C. Basing estimates of how prevalent something is on how easily examples of it come to mind. Explanation. Two primary heuristics influence the judgments that people make. The availability heuristic leads people to estimate an event based on how easy it is to bring instances of that event to mind. For example, in the wake of a tragic event, especially if it involves widespread media coverage or cultural awareness, people are often more vigilant about the possibility of it occurring again. If you can remember many different instances of something happening, you'll tend to overestimate how often it actually occurs. The representativeness heuristic states that judgments are made based on how much something represents a particular category. For example, suppose I tell you that only 2% of students at a particular university study history of art, but 40% study physics. Then I tell you that Johannes is a student there who likes to read, enjoys his classes, and has several friends. If I ask you to estimate how likely it is that he is studying history of art, you might respond that it's a 50-50 chance because my description isn't representative of either history of art students or physics students. In reality, it's far more likely that Johannes is studying physics, given the relative percentages. There is a tendency to ignore base rates, 2% versus 40%, and focus more heavily on the category of which Johannes is more representative. Question 10e. It sometimes seems that people are bad at being rational, but human decision making may have developed this way for a reason. What do many evolutionary psychologists argue regarding human decision making abilities? Check all that apply. People tend to think in terms of frequencies, rather than probabilities. When considering how often something occurs, most researchers in cognitive psychology ask artificial questions that don't reflect how most people solve problems. See, the ability to understand mathematics serves little evolutionary or adaptive purpose. It's people tend to think in terms of frequencies, rather than probabilities, when considering how often something occurs. And most researchers in cognitive psychology ask artificial questions that don't reflect how most people solve problems. Explanation. Evolutionary psychology looks at how behavior changes in response to our circumstances and environment. Many evolutionary psychologists argue that the definition of rationality used by academic psychologists is unrealistically rigorous and artificial compared to how decision-making abilities might have evolved. In their view, our reasoning abilities are rooted in the adaptive needs of our ancestors, whose understanding of probability was limited to personal experience. If something happens frequently, it is likely to happen again in the future. When problems are framed this way, people tend to make fewer errors than when they are forced to use probabilities and statistical analyses. And that wraps Chapter 8's Mindtap. Next up is Chapter 9's Mindtap.